In his epic page-turner, Theodor Geisel crafted a powerful tale of a young man's quest to convince his compatriot to partake in a culinary adventure. The main character, who remains nameless, is constantly bombarded by a young man named Sam. This young man creates scenarios trying to compel this man to consume something that he is certain he will not enjoy. But Sam continues to insist but the man is like, he says that he could not, that he would not eat this food. He would not eat it here or there. He would not eat it anywhere. But Sam is persistent. He says, what about in a house or with a mouse? With a fox or in a box? In a car with a little star? Say what a lot of fish there are. I'm getting my stories mixed up. You see, the main character continues to refuse Sam. Sam is relentless. And so after all the chiming and rhyming and conniving, the main character acquiesces. And he finally takes a bite. And he discovers that he does like green eggs and ham. And that he will eat them with a goat, in a moat, on a boat, wearing a coat. And this I quote, I will eat them here and there. I will eat them anywhere. I do so like green eggs and ham. Thank you, Sam I am. See, green eggs and ham can be a metaphor for our spiritual journey. We start out obstinately refusing to follow Jesus. There's no way we are going to follow him here, there, or anywhere. Perhaps we've had a bad religious experience and we want nothing to do with him. Or maybe we just like things the way they are. We don't want things to change. We don't want this Jesus coming in. We know that he's going to cost us more than we'd like to spend. Or maybe we've had people constantly judging us, thinking that we are people that would never follow Jesus, so why should we even bother? Or maybe we have that really annoying person that just keeps telling us that we need to follow Jesus, and it becomes like this earworm, and we just stop listening. We don't want anything to do with Christianity. But then, somewhere along the way, something happens. And we surrender. We hear Jesus inviting us to follow him. And like Matthew, we respond. We decide that we will follow him. We will follow him here. We will follow him there. We will follow him anywhere. You see, Jesus was walking along and so happens to pass by Matthew's tax collector's booth. Now, we have to realize that this was not by chance. We know Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. But because of Matthew's career choice, he'd been rejected by the majority of society. You see, Matthew, of course, was a tax collector, and even today, nobody likes tax collectors. The people that take your money and give it to that tyrannical, oppressive government that's occupying the homeland. No one wants to pay their taxes, right? But Matthew seems like the type of person that would never follow Jesus. He has money, success. He has a community of like-minded friends, though nefarious they may be. But Jesus walks by and he looks at Matthew and he says, "Follow me." And much to everyone's surprise, Matthew does just that. He gets up and he follows Jesus. And to start his new career, he hosts a dinner party. And he invites his friends from all over, his fellow tax collectors and other people called sinners. They would all come to his house to celebrate. Of course, this draws the negative attention of the religious elite. They go and they say to Jesus' disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" They don't go to Jesus, they go to his disciples and ask that. Because the religious leaders, want nothing to do with these people. You see, they view anyone, they put this whole category of sinner on anyone who's violated either the moral laws or the religious laws. So anyone who was a lawbreaker of any kind back then was considered by this religious elite to be a sinner. So there could be a person who committed adultery and a person who ate pork would both be considered sinners. A person who was a murderer or a thief or someone who didn't wash their hands the right way were classified as sinners. William Barclay says this about them. It says, the strict lawkeeper must have no fellowship with sinners at all. He must not talk with them, go on a journey with them. He must not even do business with them. Above all, he must not accept hospitality from or give hospitality to such a person. Or as our friend Dr. Seuss would say, they would not eat with them in a boat. They would not eat with them with a goat. They would not eat with them in the rain, in the dark, or on a train, not in a car, not in a tree. They are no good. No good, you see. And if I were Matthew, I probably would have my feelings for those people would be mutual, right? I would want nothing to do with them as well. Why would you want to associate with people who are constantly looking down on you? People who would think that you are terrible, horrible, no good, and very bad. Matthew wanted nothing to do with these religious people. But Jesus was different. Jesus invited him to follow him. Jesus says to Matthew, follow me where I roam, follow me from your home, follow me here, there, follow me everywhere. This seems like a straight enough story. We understand Matthew follows Jesus, but there's things that we can discover through this simple story about what it meant for Matthew to follow Jesus and what it also means for us to answer that call of Jesus to say, follow me. So first we can discover that following Jesus is a choice. Jesus extends an invitation for Matthew to follow. He sees Matthew and he says to Matthew, follow me. And Matthew got up and followed him. Of course, Matthew was given a choice. He could have just ignored it. He could have stayed in his own way. He could have stayed in his tax collecting booth and collecting money. Or he could embrace something new. At no point in the story does Jesus force himself on Matthew. He doesn't force Matthew to follow him. He doesn't pester him like Sam I am. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow me. He just simply says, follow me here and there. And Matthew takes up the chair, makes the choice to follow him. I mean, Matthew is given this choice, and that's the very reason that Jesus even came in the first place. It's because God has given humanity a choice. At creation, he has endowed us with free will, which gives us the choice to either accept or reject God. And so, like Matthew, we too are given a choice. Jesus walks up to us and he looks at us and he says, follow me. He extends the invitation to us. We're not forced to surrender to God. It's our decision to make. We make it for ourselves. It's not a decision, though, that we should make haphazardly or willy-nilly. We need to really make it intentionally. So, because that leads us to the next thing, that following Jesus is a commitment. Because Matthew not only just simply chose to follow Jesus that day, by doing what he did, he committed his life to Jesus. In the Luke telling of the story, unlike the other ones, it says that Matthew was leaving everything behind. And he got up and followed him. This phrase, leaving everything behind. So Matthew, when he chose to follow Jesus that moment, he was leaving his old life behind. One does not simply walk away from being a tax collector. William Barclay would tell us that of all the disciples, Matthew gave up the most. In abandoning his position, Matthew was leaving his old life fully behind. Barclay continues to say that Peter and Andrew, James and John, they could have gone back to their boats. But Matthew burned his bridges completely. With one action, in one moment of time, by one swift decision, he put himself out of a job forever, and he would never get it back. Unlike the fishermen who could go back fishing, we see this at the end of John. They decide to go back fishing after Jesus' resurrection because they didn't know what they were doing. But Matthew, he couldn't say, oh, I'm just going to go back to tax collecting. His career, his reputation, whatever he had for himself was gone. The choice to follow Jesus cost him everything. By walking away from tax collecting, he was fully committing himself to Jesus. And think about this for yourself. If committing to Jesus means that you give up, that everything in your life would change, that things in your life would change, that your career, your reputation, your relationships, you really thought about that. That's what it meant to commit to Jesus. What would you choose? Oftentimes, we try to undersell the gospel. We try to invite people just to follow him and make it almost seem like it's easy. It says, oh, it's about getting an eternal reward. Heaven good, hell bad, follow Jesus. Following Jesus is more than just an eternal destination. It's about committing yourself and counting the cost and making the daily sacrifices needed of putting Jesus first in your lives, above all your other desires. Those who commit to follow Jesus are inviting him to be an active, most important part of their spiritual life. And so Jesus asks them to commit their lives, to follow him on a boat and by the tree, in a house. He says, follow me. And when we do, when we follow Jesus, we discover that following him changes us. Matthew got up and followed him, and everything was about to change. All that he was, all that he thought he would be, was no more. By committing himself to Jesus, he had lost a lot, but he gained something more. And from that moment on, Matthew was no longer a tax collector. He was a disciple. And his journey with Jesus was just beginning. And his life was going to be constantly changing. Matthew would follow Jesus the rest of his life. He would write this gospel story of Jesus. He would share his experiences with others. It's believed that Matthew eventually made his way down into Africa and to Ethiopia, which finally gave his life for Jesus. In Romans chapter 12, it says, do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We have to understand that when Jesus changes us, it doesn't happen all at once. We're not all of a sudden something completely different. Just like a caterpillar doesn't instantly turn into a butterfly. Change takes time. It's a slow, arduous process. It takes our whole lives. When we choose to follow Jesus, we decide to go on that lifelong, hard journey of transformation, surrendering control of our lives to him. But through Matthew's story, we also discover that following Jesus is contagious. Matthew answered Jesus' call and set the example for others to follow. In Mark's telling of the story, it says that many tax collectors and sinners were eating with them, for there were many who were now following him. Matthew had stepped out of the tax collecting booth, and his colleagues noticed. Matthew's difficult choice was on display for others to see and for others to follow. And so he hosted a gathering. He invited all these people to come and meet and greet Jesus. And through Matthew's powerful example, others began to join as well. truth is, many people try to say that we should keep our faith private. It's not really meant to be shared, but that's not what Jesus says. Jesus tells us not to hide the light of God in our lives under a bushel, keep it hidden from others, but to let it shine all around. Too often we're afraid that people will be offended or reject us. Matthew's story shows us the contagious power of our testimonies. When we share our stories of how God is at work in us, it becomes infectious. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we continually go back to these This Is My Story series. We're allowing people in our congregation to share their story and how their spiritual journey has shaped their lives and how it becomes contagious for us to hear their stories and inspires us to follow suit, and it frees others to do the same. But also we learned this, that following Jesus, it confronts our expectations. See, when the Pharisees, they had this expectation of what a religious leader should be like. And so when Jesus wasn't meeting that expectation, they confronted his disciples. Says, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Matthew was hosting this gathering, and the Pharisees came along. And one of the Pharisees, named Obi-Wan, says that you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. The religious elite would always think that these people Jesus was eating with would be scum. These people are the ones, though, that Jesus spent time with. That began to mess with their brains. They didn't really understand how this could happen, why a religious leader would do such a thing. They had an expectation of who was worthy of God and who wasn't. And Matthew, the tax collector, and all these other notorious sinners were not part of that list. And we know that when people change, it's hard to understand that, right? It's hard to see someone, maybe we had this previous opinion about, and then something goes and they've changed, and you still hold on to their memory like they're this terrible person. Maybe you've gone to your high school reunion, and you see these people that made your high school career terrible. Now they've changed, become better people. But yet you will not like them. You will not like them in a house or with a mouse. You will not like them here or there. You will not like them anywhere. We need to let go of those notions, these ideas of who is worthy to follow Jesus and who isn't. But following Jesus, it confronts our expectations. And I was not sure, maybe I shouldn't use this word confronting, because sometimes people take it as in a negative way, right? We don't want to be confronted, but also some people, they feel it's their job. They're going to confront people. They're going to tell them how bad they are, how wrong they are. And unfortunately, under the guise of Christianity, some people have taken it even too far. We've heard about people bombing abortion clinics or protesting funerals of homosexuals or just shouting mean and nasty, hateful things at other people. But those who follow Jesus should be doing the opposite. This is what Jesus told the Pharisees who had this expectation. He says, go and learn what this means. And he quotes the prophet Hosea, who, if you know his story, is pretty crazy. He says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. In other words, God wants us to show mercy, to show love, more than following the rules. The greatest commandment, Jesus tells us, is to love. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. When we do not show love, we are not showing mercy. And all our rule following is for naught. But as Jesus we follow Jesus, we see that Jesus is always meeting these confrontations with mercy. Always, even when they're out together, he's extending mercy, which eventually leads to the ultimate act of mercy, where Jesus willingly went to the cross, taking our sin, our shame, our confrontation, and he extends eternal mercy. Following Jesus doesn't mean that we need to confront others, but when we are confronted, we seek mercy. We respond with mercy to all those, to our friends, in the end, to those we hate. It's not too late. Finally, we discover that following Jesus is a continual process. Jesus told these Pharisees that it's not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. That he didn't come to call the righteous, but the sinners. See, Matthew, he understood that he was sick. Is spiritually sick, that he was in need of a healing. It's not true for everyone. Sometimes when you're sick, you're supposed to make changes. Not everyone does this, but when you do, you think you get diagnosed with something, so you realize you need help. You need to make changes. Matthew knew in his heart that it was time for a change. That after all the striving, all that he had gone through, everything he had was really of little worth. He realized that he needed to follow Jesus. It's at that moment, as Jesus passed by, it could have been a different moment, and Matthew might not have responded the way he did. But Matthew chose. But I can imagine, like Matthew, I can understand there's probably times where he wondered, why did I make this decision? I wonder if the next day he woke up after that party and was like, wait, did I just do what I think I did? The thing is that following Jesus is a continual surrendering to him. We don't just do it once. We have to continue to recommit our lives to following Jesus. Each day, each moment, each time we wake up, each time we just feel struggles, we have to remind ourselves to return to following him. See, Jesus, not Sam I am, but the great I am, continues to invite us to follow him. He meets us where we're at. And he says to each and every one of us those two little words, follow me. If we're honest, there are days when the answer is no. I've had enough, done, not worth it. But thankfully, Jesus is relentless and forgiving and gracious, kind, slow to anger, and abounding in love. I want you to just close your eyes and picture that. Picture Jesus walking toward you. Your eyes meet, and he says to you, follow me. So, will you follow him in your home? Will you follow him where you roam? Will you follow him at your work? Will you follow him where you lurk? Will you follow Jesus here or there? Will you follow him anywhere? In a car, in a tree? Jesus is calling. Can't you see? Follow me, follow me. He's calling you. Follow me, follow me. He makes all things new. Amen.